welcome to True Crime with me, Emma Kenny. I'm back, and if you like crime and you like consistency, then this is the channel for you. So if you have not subscribed before and you are revisiting my channel, then why don't you do that now so you never miss another thing? Get a little notification if you pop your notifications on. Give me a like, give me a comment, and if you've just stumbled across this channel, well then buckle up, because we are Crime Central. Also, huge thanks to my Patreon supporters. Really appreciate the fact that you do that. Just really amazing that I have a group of individuals who want to actually ensure that I can continue to make this kind of content, and also every single person who comments, likes, watches, you're all part of that. So thank you. It really matters, and it kind of blows my mind. If I look a little bit bog-eyed today, well, that's because I only got back from Scotland in the early hours of this morning. Yes, I was in a whole other country until the early hours of this morning. I got a bit hysterical at the end as we were driving back. I literally went into delirium, without a doubt. But I was doing my serial killer next door tour in Glasgow last night. What an amazing crowd as well. In fact, every single group of people who've come to see my tour have been so much fun, but it was quite rowdy in Scotland yesterday, and I like a bit of rowdiness. So just putting it out there, if I look a little less gathered, then that's why. Be sympathetic towards me. We're going to cover a case that I've wanted to do for a while today, but again, it's one of those where I needed to do quite a lot of research, because whilst there's a lot in the press about it, you would not believe the amount of mistakes the press make. And also, even though things like Wikipedia exist, they just never ever have the right content. You know, somebody's done a decent job, but it isn't diligent, and that means that I really have to look further into these cases. So whenever I want to do something like this, it has to be one that I can apply some time to. Hopefully you'll find it interesting, intriguing, and if you've heard about it before, or you've watched other content or documentaries, if they exist, then I'll still be able to tell you a little bit different than you already know. I'm going to be covering the case of Dylann Storm Roof. Sorry, it started already. I told you I was a bit hysterical last night. It's just, I do like the name Dylann, and I do like the name Storm. I think Storm's a lovely name. But if I had a child and they were called Roof, I wouldn't put the name Storm before it, because that makes it Storm Roof. Is it just me? I think you know where I'm going with that. Anyway, Dylann Roof is born on the 3rd of April 1994 in Columbia, that's in South Carolina in the US of A. Now, Roof's parents had one of those relationships that was quite dysfunctional to some degree. So they had got divorced, but then they got back together, and subsequently Roof was born. And his father then went on to marry somebody else when Roof was 5. Now, he spent time, as we would expect, living with both his parents, but his dad was allegedly very physically and verbally abusive to his new wife, and that meant that Roof would have been witnessing that. And what we know about children who witness this kind of dysfunction is it creates trauma, but it can also lead to some pretty negative ideas around how you should treat people who are close to you. So essentially, if we're witnessing a parent be violent to a partner, then it gives a very strong message, particularly to a boy, about acceptability levels where treating partners is concerned. And witnessing violence isn't going to be something that automatically makes a child become violent themselves, but certainly we see that individuals who are violent in the future have often encountered physical abuse themselves or been witness to it. So as Roof grows up, he starts showing some signs that his family are quite worried about. So he starts showing obsessive compulsive disorder, and this manifests itself in a few ways. So firstly, he's a germaphobe. He's compulsively using hand sanitizer. The last 2 years would have been his years, wouldn't they? Because it's frigging everywhere, hand sanitizer, isn't it? I'm not making light of OCD by any stretch. Treat it. So I understand it very, very well. However, worst case scenario for anybody who's a germaphobe is the last 2 years where they've basically been told to literally be terrified for their lives and sanitize to an inch of their life and wash their hands constantly. How to reinforce behaviors that are really problematic for those individuals suffering from OCD. But nonetheless, he hadn't encountered the COVID generation. So he's a germaphobe, compulsively worried about germs, simple as that. And it became a real running joke at school. His peers saw that as something different, and to some degree that would have isolated him a little bit, because he was dealing with something that was significantly challenging. It's a mental health issue, And the fact that people would have thought it was funny would have probably volumized and amplified the behavior. Also, he had this real fixation with his head. He felt that his forehead was very distinguishable. He didn't like it. So he decided that the way to manage that was that he would cover it up by having this really distinctive bowl or basin haircut. Reminds me of the 1980s. I may have sported that haircut myself. I know that my mother did. I have pictures and proof. And it's weird, because out of all the haircuts in the world, I don't think that anyone would need to look more than once at it to go, this is neither fashionable nor required on any level. But nonetheless, he stuck with this particular hairstyle. Now, one of the things that Roof encountered growing up as well is that his family would move around South Carolina itself a lot. So Roof attended at least 7 different schools in 9 years. And just put yourself in that position. Listen, we all know that when we're thinking about childhood, consistency is key, because you get to form peer relationships, you get to have good relationships ideally, you get to know teachers, your educational function is looked after. These are really important things. So when you have a child constantly being removed and starting again, it can be so overwhelming. Just remember what it was like when you had to make friends and then suddenly you're having to go and make friends elsewhere, and so on and so forth. So again, we can look at that as a fracture. And it seems that quite early on, school friends said that he started to develop what they considered extreme far-right views. So really early on, Roof is displaying these very concerning positions and views and beliefs. When they've looked back at this case, the catalyst as far as Roof's sudden obsession with the far-right movement seems to have been triggered by the 2012 shooting of Trayvon Martin. This is the catalyst. He was a 17-year-old African-American going about his own business. When he was shot, he was literally visiting his father's fiancée at the retreat at Twin Lakes in Sanford, Florida. Now, a member of the community watch group locally there, 28-year-old Hispanic George Zimmerman, goes over, approaches him and questions him. And a confrontation takes place, at which point Trayvon is shot. Now, I appreciate that in the States, guns are legal in lots of places. I appreciate that that means that people will be armed at times. But when you are questioned, and particularly in the States, let's put it into context, this is a black young man who's just going to see his father's fiancée, minding his own business, and somebody comes over and confronts you because they think that maybe you shouldn't be there. That can be really affronting when you've already carried a great deal of potential experiences of prejudice towards you. So it can feel very racially motivated. And in that moment, that means that you're not necessarily as calm as you would be, because you feel like, why are you pointing me out? Why are you choosing to question me about being here? I'm not saying that's the case, but I'm saying it's quite a provoker, isn't it? It's something that could trigger somebody to feel really upset and really hurt. And this altercation occurs. This poor guy, Trayvon, gets shot. And initially, Zimmerman isn't even charged. In fact, he claims self-defense. Now, he did have a broken nose and he did have cuts to the back of his head. So clearly there was an altercation that became physical, but because he didn't get charged, there were loads of demonstrations and there were lots of far-right groups who were clashing with civil rights groups. And after nearly 2 months, he was finally charged with second-degree murder. So those demonstrations, they played in to the fact that the community wanted somebody brought to justice for the death of this young guy. Now, ultimately, he wasn't found guilty of murder. In fact, he wasn't found guilty full stop. And one of the big problems that was played out in the press was that when the trial was looked at, there was a lot of criticism because it seemed like they made Trayvon the villain in that piece. And we're talking about a young 17-year-old guy who died when he was visiting his father's fiancée. And he should have just been able to go there and go home without any problems. And you can understand why that would cause a lot of negativity in the community. Now, Roof looked at this case and he fully supported Zimmerman. You know, he felt that he appealed to him to some degree like some neo-Nazi, some kind of martyr to the cause. And he really started to have this connection with people who identified as neo-Nazis. So an individual already looking for a place where he can connect his feelings. You know, that's what's happening here. Roof is looking for role models that he feels reflect and that he can identify with feelings-wise. And the fact he's searching for that shows you that he's obviously having some quite sinister beliefs growing within him, particularly directed towards the Black community. In fact, later down the line, in his far-right manifesto, he stated that it was this case that truly awakened him. So that psychologically and emotionally, just in language, tells you, doesn't it, that there was something sleeping within him, and then this case wakes that up. So a sense of coming to the senses and recognizing and realizing the world that he's in and the place that he wishes to take within that. And that's a very pivotal moment. Roof actually said, I read the Wikipedia article and right away I was unable to understand what the big deal was. It was obvious that Zimmerman was in the right, but more importantly, this prompted me to type in the words black on white crime into Google. And I have never been the same since that day. The first website I came to was the Council of Conservative Citizens. There were pages upon pages of these brutal black on white murders. I was in disbelief. At this moment, I realized that something was very wrong. How could the news be blowing up the Trayvon Martin case while hundreds of these black on white murders got ignored? So he connects going on Dr. Google. By the way, if you put into Google, just to put this in context, who is the most influential doctor in the world, it comes up with Bill Gates, who, guess what, isn't a doctor for a start, and certainly not a medical one, and yet apparently he's the most influential doctor in the world, according to Google. Need we say more? But for Roof, when he looks online and he sees this particular website highlighting all these black on white murders, this confirms to him that somehow black people need to be taken into hand. And also it confirms a bias. Think about that. Confirmation bias is something that we see all the time. If you want to find something that confirms the way you think, you can go online and find it. And the thing about confirmation bias is you don't actually need millions of people agreeing with you. You just need a few. You can discount the ones who disagree with you. That's how powerful it is. So he manages to find this website which has got this completely biased presenting about the fact that black people murder white people, and he allows that to inform him that therefore all of his feelings and thoughts about this particular issue are correct. So he's starting to feel incredibly resentful. And we know what resentment is like. It's powerfully destructive in the wrong places. And Roof would often rant a great deal online. In 2015, he actually goes on about the Baltimore riots, because in the Baltimore riots, there's a death of Freddie Gray. Now, he's a 25-year-old black man. He died of a spinal cord injury while in police custody. So this guy is injured when he's in a place which should be safe, albeit that he's in prison, in custody. He should have been safe, right? The fact that he gets a spinal cord injury, which is really serious, suggests that there has been some foul play. And no one's ever prosecuted for that death. So he dies of this spinal cord injury whilst he's meant to be being looked after by law enforcers, and his death goes without any punishment. From there were so many weeks of really tense protests. There were riots. They broke out particularly after the funeral. There was lots of damage to buildings. There were police officers who were injured, and there was also a lot of looting. Of course, none of that's acceptable. None of that is acceptable. I'm not sitting here and saying that I understand why those things happen, but I'm saying that if people get away with what could be considered murder or unlawful killing, then it's going to provoke feelings in a community that reflect that they feel that they might be an individual who could find themselves in such a similar position. So you're not just dealing with the fact that people feel angry and are looking for a legitimate way to express their anger and using this for an excuse. You're talking about a whole community thinking, Jesus Christ, that could have been me in that cell. I need to show people who are meant to be in charge of this situation that they can't carry on doing this way and acting this way. So it plays out, and I appreciate how destructive looting is, and it's not a reason to go ahead and do that at any point, but we have to understand the psychology and reasoning behind it. So there's a lot of racial tension at this moment in time, and Roof and the people who are like Roof really fed off it. They really fed off it. And at this point, he starts uploading photos of himself, and he's wearing things like white supremacist flags on his clothes. So he's very clearly walking into this situation where he's starting to own the landscape. He wants people to know how he feels. He even, and this is really scary and also frustrating as hell, he starts telling his friends and neighbours that he plans to kill people. He also tells them that he's planning an attack on the College of Charleston, but even though he's saying it very overtly, they don't think he's serious. They think he's just kind of saying what he thinks and feels in the moment and isn't actually planning or plotting on doing anybody harm. And a roommate of Roof's also said that he told him that what he would dream of was the idea of creating a segregated America, and that he wanted to start a race war. So he is really hardline on this. He's decided that it should be whites versus blacks, you know, going back ludicrous amounts of time in history to a time where anybody would have ever thought that was acceptable. But we all know it was a time when people did. Even when you look at apartheid in South Africa, we can see that even in modern history, these kind of horrific segregations have played out. He wants that. He, in his childish mind, because he's still a kid, sees to some degree that that's a better situation and scenario for the world around him than the one he's currently inhabiting. Obviously completely misplaced, but the point is that's his feeling. Now, what's strange about him is when you look at his friendship network, he had black friends. And those black friends said, look, he was never racist to us. So after he's carried out the killings, when people are looking at his profile and trying to understand him and saying that actually it's quite strange because he did have black friends, some of whom came out and spoke about him in support of that, he denies it. And he said that he hadn't had a black friend in years and that he never, ever had a close black friend. So whether that's to do with him telling himself that, so lying to himself, or whether that's the fact that he just pretended he was friends with them, or whether it's just recognizing that he's decided to lie in his bed and it's going to be a very racist bed, or when he goes to prison, people identify him that way, I don't know. But he denies that kind of connection. Ultimately, he drops out of school. And when he drops out of school, he just spends his time playing video games, and then he's drinking and he's taking drugs quite heavily. Still, we've got a developing brain going on here. He's still a young man. That's going to be potentially problematic on his brain, particularly excessive drug taking. One of the drugs that he took as well, I looked up, and it's Suboxone, and that is a drug used to treat opiate addiction, and it's very often used as a recreational drug. It's a very, very strong. Bear in mind, if you are getting somebody off heroin, you are going to need a very strong drug to get them off it, because withdrawal is horrific. And very often, when you are coming off a drug, the drugs that you are given are equally as problematic for you, because they clearly mimic the sense of well-being to some degree that you get whilst you are high on a particular drug. And then that means that you have a connection with the drug that you're meant to be getting off those opiates with. So again, we can kind of see he's really going for some high-level drug use at this moment in time. Now, in March 2015, he has a brush with the police. So he's questioned by them because he's been to the shopping mall. It's called Columbia Center. And people who were around him thought he was acting suspiciously. I think it's the hair. Not gonna lie. If you're gonna look at him and be like, who am I gonna think potentially is a murderer? That kid with the really weird hair. It's just too bowl-like. That's the kind of thing that happens when you have bizarre hairstyles. Anyway, he's acting suspiciously. He's dressed completely in black with a bowl cut. He's made loads of concerning comments to employees there. And so when the police arrive, they search him and he's in possession of Suboxone. So at this moment, they arrest him for drug possession. And he's also banned from the shopping centre for 1 year, which is a pretty strong reaction, I think. I mean, in the UK, people are caught quite often with drugs and they're not banned from the local shopping centre. We used to have a thing called an ASBO. It might still exist, but the antisocial behaviour order, they were really useless, because what would happen is you would basically get a kid banned from an area, mostly where they lived, which made that quite confusing and difficult. And then you would send a picture of that child around all the local area so that people could see the kid that had been barred. And then it just made the kid really notorious. Simple as that. So whilst I jest a little bit, obviously it's an issue, isn't it? The fact that he's got banned, he's high when he's there, and he's making strange comments to people that are working there. And later the same month, ironically, the officer who previously arrested Roof during that situation spots him basically loitering in a car near Columbia Centre. So one, he's in an area he shouldn't be. And secondly, this guy thinks, I recognise him. There's only one kid in this whole area with that hairstyle. So he goes over and he searches the car, and he finds that he's in possession of a forearm grip for an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle, and he's also got 6 empty magazines. Now, the forearm grip is an attachment that basically makes the gun easier to handle. It gives it more manoeuvrability, and he tells the police at that point that he's saving up for a rifle. Now, there isn't an offence to answer at this moment in time. It's not illegal to be in possession of a gun forearm grip, so there is nothing that he can do about that. But within the next month, in spite of these 2 altercations he had with the police and being banned from Columbia Centre, Roof goes back to visit, meaning he's in breach of the ban, and they give him an extra 3 years. Now, this is really interesting to me, because if you're living in a local area and you rely on that particular shopping mall to just go and be social, go and get things that you want, if you're thinking consequentially, you're not going to go back there because of the fact that you're going to get an extra ban. And the fact that he does go and do that says to me that he isn't thinking consequentially about the future. So is it that he's not really concerned about being banned because he doesn't necessarily believe that a future is something that he's going to inhabit? I pose that question because I think his behaviour in the future demonstrates that he was not thinking that he was going to be alive a very long time. What's really frustrating, and I say this a lot in my YouTube videos, because this could have been avoided, and it really could have been. Because when Roof was arrested in March for drug possession, the actual offence was incorrectly entered. It was entered as a felony charge on the police system. And obviously, when you're buying a gun, you have to do background checks to make sure that the person who's buying the arms is going to be responsible enough to look after them. So that background check is really essential. And it means that if the information had been put in correctly, Roof would never have been allowed to purchase a weapon, because the law explicitly barred unlawful users of any controlled substances from purchasing a firearm, and this included Suboxone. So therefore, Roof should never have been allowed under any circumstances to get his hands on a firearm. Checks weren't made. And because of that, Roof purchased the gun. So this is a real letdown. So one, we have the issue about the incorrect inputting of the felony charge, but then secondly, what happened to the actual background checks? Because they would have found out that he'd taken Suboxone, was under the influence, and therefore couldn't have a gun. Now, Roof becomes more and more isolated. Think about what we've seen. He's dropped out of school, he's banned from his local shopping centre, and now he's spending a huge amount of time by himself with Google and associated opportunities to search the web. And when you are almost in a scenario where you are wanting to be radicalised, shall we say, that time and opportunity is something that can have a profound impact on your points of view. And it's at this point he does indeed start to express even more extreme views. And his own uncle starts getting really worried about him. He actually said on reflection, he didn't have a job, he didn't have a driver's license, he didn't have anything that his peers would experience or have. You know, there are certain milestones that he certainly had not achieved and didn't seem to have any interest in achieving. I'm saying that again, let's introduce that thought once more. Was he thinking about a future? You don't need a driving license, you don't need an education, you don't need a house of your own if you're not intending to be around very long. So him just staying in his room and not looking for any of these milestones to occur says to me once again he wasn't thinking about a long-term future. But his family are concerned about him. He also cuts himself off from his wider family, and it's like he just withdraws into this really warped online world. And what this results in is a term that we call domestic terrorism, a tragic, tragic case of domestic terrorism. On the 17th of June 2015, 21-year-old Dylann Roof sets off from his home in Columbia at 6:13 p.m. His sat-nav records his entire journey and all the times that he was involved in movement. He's unemployed at this point, is living in Eastover with his parents, and in that area there is a majority African American population. So you would imagine that for him, living in that area relatively peacefully, surrounded by African American people, that he wouldn't feel under threat of them, because there isn't really any evidence for him to do that. But remember, he's been being radicalized personally, engaging in all of these opportunities to breed senses of hate, division, to isolate himself from the rest of the world, because he believes that the agenda that he has in his head that is fermenting and is becoming more and more resentful is the correct agenda. Remember, he's thought that previous killers of African Americans are martyrs. Totally ludicrous, but this is his mindset. He drives on the I-26 interstate highway. He's heading for Charleston, South Carolina, and he's got a target. He has picked this target out. It's the Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church. So he specifically decided that this is his target. And before I even go any further, I guess all of you are thinking exactly the same. Why would you pick a church? Like, if there is one place that good people are likely to be, it's church. Okay, it's a major stereotype. I know quite a lot of our serial killers used to go to church, so you do get the odd wrong gun. But for the most part, you get a really devoted group of human beings who want to look after each other. And the fact that he's going for these very vulnerable individuals who would be massively unsuspecting just demonstrates a level of hostility and aggression that I think violence-wise is very unusual. Now, the church that he's going to is known locally as Mother Emanuel, and he picks this for a very good reason. It's a very historic African-American church. It's one of the oldest black churches in the United States, and it's long been considered a place where people would organise events which were related to civil rights. Remember, he has a big problem with civil rights. He doesn't think that black people deserve the same level of rights as white people. So delusional, so totally broken in his mindset. So he's selected this church because, as far as he is concerned, they are using their voice to help with the civil rights of human beings, and particularly the civil rights of black human beings. And it's horrible to imagine that when he's driving to that church, he has one thing in mind. It wasn't civil rights. It was as far away from civil rights as it could possibly be. It's the killing of innocent African Americans. 7:48 p.m, he completes his journey. He parks near the Mother Emanuel Church. He spent nearly half an hour waiting. And during that time, he's loading his gun. He's getting his magazines ready. He's drinking a bottle of Smirnoff Ice. And that in itself shows us, doesn't it? He's preparing psychologically. We all know what it's like to have a drink to give us Dutch courage. The majority of us will know in those moments where we feel a little bit anxious and we have a drink and we just feel a little bit more relaxed. And if you've got to go and do something that even for you seems outside the realms of ration, just allowing yourself that alcohol reduces those inhibitions. So he's cultivating this perfect opportunity, both psychologically, emotionally, and physically with his gun, so that he's ready. Whilst he's preparing to kill, 12 parishioners and church leaders gathered at Mother Emanuel Church. They had their weekly Wednesday night Bible study class. This is a group of people wanting to know how to be good humans. 74-year-old Reverend Daniel Simmons, Sr., he's a study leader, popular, very well-respected figure in the local community. In fact, known as the backbone of the church. But this particular night, he isn't leading the actual study class itself. Instead, he's invited 59-year-old Reverend Myra Thompson. She's going to lead the class for the first time, and she was thrilled. She'd been awarded her preaching certificate earlier that evening. Imagine that. This is a moment where she has achieved a dream, and now she's getting the opportunity to sit with parishioners and take that Bible study class. She was excited. She was proud. This was a really important moment for her. Reverend Thompson had asked her close friend, 72-year-old Polly Shepherd, to also attend to give her some support. We all know how it is when we're nervous. It's so nice to have a friendly set of eyes and ears with us. And several members of the Jackson family were present that night. They had the matriarch of the Jackson family. She was 87-year-old Susie Jackson. She's very well known in the community. She was a respected figure. She sang in the church choir. She also had a nephew with her, 26-year-old Tiwanza Sanders, and he was there with his mother, Felicia Sanders. Tiwanza and Felicia were very, very, very close as they could be, as close as they could be. Felicia's 11-year-old granddaughter is also present, and Tawanza was basically, as far as the whole family were concerned, like a dad to that little girl. So we're talking about an incredibly connected family, a loving family, a family who shared so many things aside from love, including interests in their belief system. Another well-known face that night was Mother Emanuel's lead pastor. That was 41-year-old state senator, Reverend Clementa Pinckney. He was actually at church with his wife, Jennifer Pinckney, and their 6-year-old daughter, but thankfully they hadn't gone to the Bible class that night. Instead, they were basically waiting in the nearby pastor's study. So they're present, but they're not in that Bible class. 54-year-old librarian Cynthia Hurd, she was in the Bible study group that night, as was 45-year-old Reverend Sharonda Coleman Singleton. Now, she was described as the most sought-after minister in Charleston. It's a real accolade, that, isn't there? The fact that she was so well thought of. Also, 49-year-old Reverend DePayne Middleton, doctor, who could apparently sing like an angel, and 70-year-old Ethel Lance, the church sexton, and she basically kept the church clean. She would work from early morning until late at night, even sometimes accompanied by her special needs son. So these are the individuals who are there. Now, around 8:16 p.m, Ruth enters the fellowship hall. It's in the basement of the church. He's wearing a grey sweatshirt and jeans, and he's really well armed. He's carrying a Glock 45 caliber semi-automatic handgun. He also had 8 magazines loaded with 11 hollow point bullets. Number of bullets, 88. Why 88? Well, it was very well thought out. H is the 8th letter of the alphabet. 88 bullets. HH, standing for Heil Hitler. He carried the arsenal in a concealed tactical pouch, and he enters that Bible study class. And Reverend Coleman Singleton announces, "Pastor, we have a visitor." This is a white young man walking into a church in a particularly black area, known for its black civil rights and really working hard for the black community. And this white boy walks in off a street, and all that happens is he is greeted with love and compassion. Despite being an unfamiliar face, they warmly accept him. They've got no idea that as they're smiling their hellos, welcoming him into the flock, that for months, all he's been planning is how he's going to attack them. He wants to attack African Americans because he wants to instigate a race war. And Ruth asks for Reverend Pinckney so that he knows who he is, identifies him, and then goes and sits next to him. And it's at this point that Reverend Pinckney just hands over a Bible and study sheet. And Ruth actually sits for 45 minutes with those parishioners. They didn't suspect anything. And in fact, at one point, people who witnessed this and recalled what happened said that Ruth even laughed at a story that Reverend Middleton Doctor told about returning library books. And as they stood, they held hands, they closed their eyes for the closing prayer. So the moment that they are the most vulnerable, after almost an hour of making this young man feel absolutely welcome and embraced, he strikes. He pulls out a semi-automatic pistol and he begins shooting. First victim was Reverend Pinckney. He shot him multiple times. Survivors would later say that when they could hear the shooting, it sounded like a machine gun was going off. And it wasn't a machine gun, but because it was semi-automatic, even though it only fires one shot at a time, it fires very quickly. So you can do it in rapid succession. And also the used shells are automatically ejected, which allows for more bullets than a revolver. Now, the parishioners at this point start fleeing in panic. Now, some hide under the tables, as you would, but Reverend Simmons doesn't. They didn't run. They stood up instead and said, "Let me check on my pastor. I need you to check on my pastor." He then heroically runs towards Ruth and to his wounded and dying pastor, and Ruth just turns the gun on him and shoots him at least 6 times. He repeatedly shoots these people who had just welcomed him with open arms, and he shows absolutely no mercy. He just paces around the room, shooting cowering parishioners, reloading the gun, then just shooting again. He reloaded that gun 5 times. And those who remember this attack said that when he did it, he was shouting, "You all want something to pray about? I'll give you something to pray about. Felicia at this point has somehow managed to hide with her granddaughter under a table. One can only imagine the absolute horror that she is experiencing. Remember what I said to you about this incredibly close family. And she's saying to her granddaughter, play dead. And her little granddaughter's saying, no, I'm scared, I'm terrified. And she's just telling her granddaughter, be quiet. For your own sake, to be quiet. And Felicia presses her face to the little girl's body to keep her quiet. Meanwhile, Polly's hiding under the table and she sees Ruth's boots approaching, which should just be beyond harrowing. You're just waiting to die. Simple as that. You're waiting to die in that moment. She's praying loudly. This is the moment that, as far as she's concerned, she's going to meet her maker. And she's praying, she's making those amends, she's probably asking for forgiveness of her sins and just preparing to die, which I think is uniquely courageous, actually. She isn't cowering quietly. She isn't afraid of her faith in that moment. She's asking to be welcomed into the arms of God. And she's looking at him right in the eyes while she's praying. And he tells her to shut up. And then he says to her, have I shot you? And she says, no. And he said, well, that's okay, because I'm not going to shoot you. I need you to survive. I need you to tell others what happened in this night. So he wants her to be the storyteller. He wants her to be the person who historically is able to recount this, because he is seeing himself, remember, as this martyr of white supremacy to some degree. He wants somebody to be able to recall, in his eyes, his devoted martyrdom to the cause. I don't know where she would have been psychologically in that moment. I imagine she's felt horrific survivor guilt as well. Why me, she would ask, I imagine. But these are incredibly brave individuals doing the best in that moment to just cope with the catastrophic impact of this attack. Meanwhile, Tawanza is also hiding. He's been shot and injured. His concern is what is happening with his mother and niece. He knows they're still alive and all he wants is to keep them that way. And so in an attempt to detract attention from them, he sits up. So in that moment, knowing that the chances were that his mother and niece are going to be murdered, he makes Ruth aware that he's still alive. And Ruth turns to face him. And he just asks him the question, why are you doing this? And Ruth just points the gun at him and says, I have to. You're raping our women and taking over the nation. Tawanza replied, you don't have to do this. We mean you no harm. Ruth just looked at him and shot him multiple times in front of his own mother, in front of his own niece. Felicia at this point has to pretend that she's dead. She's lying in her dying son's blood. And she's holding her hand over her whimpering granddaughter's mouth, who's just witnessed the murder of somebody she considers a father figure in her life. And the irony that this God-fearing man has been murdered because Ruth believes that he is somebody who stands, as far as he's concerned, for people who are going around raping women. It's as far away from the reality of the people that he's murdered. I mean, one, it's a ridiculous idea to believe and hold that view that black men are going around raping white women. It's just absolute lies. It doesn't stand up whatsoever. But the fact that he's gone to this place where there are just moral human beings, loving moral human beings, and this is the kind of action that he feels is going to change these kind of situations and circumstances. At this point, knowing that he's obviously let a lot of his rounds go, Ruth turns the gun on himself, puts it to his head and pulls the trigger. But a witness said that he had run out of ammunition, essentially. But clearly, he had intended to kill himself. And that's what I was talking about earlier on, where we see that he was not making any plans. His entire life had been devoted to this moment. He wasn't meant to survive it. He's meant to be a martyr to the cause, but he's misjudged it. And there isn't a bullet. So suddenly, he's got all of these people dead, and the chances are he's going to have to face the consequences. Unbeknown to him, by this point, Polly has managed to call 911. Jennifer, one of the other parishioners, she's been hiding with her daughter in the study. She'd heard the gunfire and she'd also called 911. So they've now got 2 calls. Clearly the police are rushing there. At 9:06 p.m, Roof basically made some really awful racial slurs over the victims' bodies and then leaves the church. And as he leaves, he drops a tactical bag, which he'd used to conceal the gun and the ammunition. Not forensically very clever. Obviously recognises that he's definitely going to get caught, isn't actually concerned about taking those items with him. What's really sad is at this point, Tiwanza is still alive, but he's mortally wounded. He'd seen his elderly aunt get shot, and he's trying to crawl towards her, and he's screaming, "Aunt Susie." His mother Felicia at this point is trying to keep him still because he's bleeding out. All she wants is help to arrive. And the police and paramedics do arrive quite quickly, but they can't save him. Reverend Simmons was also alive at this point when the first responders arrive, but he had really catastrophic injuries and he died shortly later in the hospital. And 7 more people were pronounced dead at that scene. And when they do the autopsies, pretty much every single one of the individuals who was murdered had been shot at least 5 times. And many of them had wounds to their arms, obviously trying to defend themselves. Others had shots that were really clustered together, so he kind of aimed and carried on firing. And during that shooting spree, which lasted approximately 6 minutes, Roof killed 9 parishioners. That was Reverend Sharonda Coleman Singleton. She was a speech therapist, pastor, high school track coach, and a mother of 3. He killed Cynthia Hurd, an employee of the Charleston County Public Library for 31 years. She was described as a tireless servant of the community. She was looking forward to retirement. Susie Jackson, beloved grandmother and long-time church member, described as a loving, giving person with a great smile. Ethel Lee Lance worked for the church for 30 years, had 5 children, 7 children, and 4 great-grandchildren. Reverend DePayne Middleton Doctor, an enrollment counsellor at Southern Wesleyan University and a mother of 4 daughters and a minister at the church. Reverend Clementa Pickney, a married father of 2, a rising star in Democratic politics. Tiwanza Sanders, the youngest victim, recent graduate of Allen University, saved 3 lives by distracting Roof when he was already injured. What a hero. Reverend Daniel Simmons Sr., a retired reverend and a member of the Mother Emanuel staff, father and also grandfather. Reverend Myra Thompson, a mother and pastor at the church and a member of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority. She had achieved her goal of becoming a minister on the day that she was killed. Can you believe that? I don't know whether I feel comfort or great sadness at that. I'm glad she achieved it. I'm glad that the day that she met her maker, she was able to have achieved that goal. Roof fired 74 bullets in total. As I said, every single one of his victims had been shot multiple times. And of that Bible study class, only Polly, Felicia, and her granddaughter survived. Of course, Jennifer and her daughter, because they were sheltering the study, they also survived. And Roof would later tell authorities that the reason he nearly didn't go through with his mission wasn't because he suddenly had second thoughts because who wants to go around killing innocent people? No, it wasn't that. It was for one reason that he nearly didn't go through with it. It was because he felt that the Bible study group had been so nice to him. And they had. Isn't it strange, that little voice of conscience, even within individuals like this, it exists. That little voice that tells you what you need to know, informs you of what you should and shouldn't do. And even though he had that vitriol, that hate, those false prophets that he was following, that voice existed. And if only he'd have listened to it. Because not one of those individuals needed to die, and none of them deserved to die. But even he could see that these human beings were really special human beings, and yet he went through it still. The manhunt then begins. So the authorities straight away, serious act of terrorism. They get CCTV footage from the church and they can see the perpetrator straight away. And as we all know, it's not like Roof doesn't look a little bit strange compared to peers of his age. Therefore, because of his issue with his forehead, he's got this bowl cut and he looks quite odd. When you look at pictures of him, he stands out. So they release this image to the media, and straight away the manhunt is huge. And it really doesn't take long for them to be able to identify who he is. Even members of his own family contacted the police, including his own half-sister. So she's older than him, she sees the pictures, and she's like, what I should do is deport my brother. No, it's not. I'm going to ring up straight away and tell them, it's my brother, the strange one, bad hair, doesn't leave the room. I think there's something seriously amiss with him. So the family are completely supportive of the police investigation. FBI are called in straight away. Obviously, this is an act of terrorism, and they get very involved immediately. Meanwhile, Roof has not planned for this, has he? He's meant to be dead. His consequential thinking has not been part of the process. He's got nowhere to go, no money to go there, no means to go there, so to speak, and now the whole country's looking for him. Now, this is ironically a really common trait among mass murderers. They do not expect to survive the shooting. Think about your school shooters. The vast majority of them, in fact, kill themselves on the spot. So they have only thought to the point where the crime is completed, and then they're meant to exit this world fully. So he expected to kill himself or to be killed by responding officers, and it hadn't happened. So he's unsure of what to do next. So he leaves Charleston on the interstate highway and he heads north towards Charlotte, which is in North Carolina. And it's the next morning, around 11:15 in the morning, police spot Roof's car in Shelby. That's 244 miles from the scene of the killing, so he's just driven. And a driver, Debbie Mills, had recognised Roof's car, and unsurprisingly, his haircut. You're right, his haircut was one of the things that drew her attention. She probably wasn't even looking at the car. She was probably just like, what is that hair? Oh, wait a minute, I think I recognise that guy. So she contacts her employer, and that employer reports it to the police, and then they tail Roof and his car for 35 miles until the authorities move in. The officers then stop the car, they order Roof to get out of the vehicle, ask him his name, and he just says, I'm Dylann Roof. So he's not going to try to run, he's not going to try to pretend he's somebody else. He knows he's bound to rights, it's as simple as that. They then say to him, are you responsible for the Charleston shooting? And he says, yeah, I am. Roof also told officers that there's a gun on the back of the seat, and they retrieved the Glock semi-automatic. So now they've got the weapon that actually took the lives of those innocent individuals. So Roof's arrested, taken to Shelby Police Station. During 2 hours of questioning, Roof just confesses to his crime. Chillingly, during that confession, when he's asked if he'd planned to kill more people, he just basically says, oh no, I was worn out.
Whoa. Yeah, I mean, I went to that church in Charleston, and, I did it.
We did what?
Well,
I know it's tough sometimes to say.
It's not that I don't want to say it because I don't want to make myself seem guilty. I just don't really like saying it.
But I know sometimes we have to face those things, the realities.
We don't want to put any words in your mouth. That's why.
Right.
That's why Agent Stansbury just was asking you what it exactly is that you did do.
Well, I killed him. Oh, well, I guess. I mean, I don't really know. I don't know how many people or anything like that.
So did you shoot him?
Yes.
What kind of gun did you use?
A Glock 45.
Okay. Was that your gun or?
Yes, I bought it from the gun store. Anyway, they saw it, but I just sat down because I guess they just didn't say anything, and then I was sitting there and I was like, just thinking about whether I should do it or not, and that's why I was sitting there for 15 minutes, just like, because I know I could have just walked out, because they didn't say anything to me about what, the thing on my belt. So I could have walked out, and that's what I was just thinking, But then I just, I don't know, it's like, not, you want to say spur of the moment, but I just finally decided I had to do it. And that's pretty much it.
Well, then that goes to the next question. Why did you have to do it?
Oh, I had to do it.
How come? I mean, that's what I don't know. I mean,
well, I had to do it because somebody had to do something.
We see this, don't we, with a lot of our serial killer friends. I use the friends in an ironic context. I don't have any serial killer friends. Mind you, I might, because some of them are very difficult to find out who they are. So who knows, maybe in 15 years, I'll find out I do know some. Maybe you'll find out I'm not one. Anyway, I'm moving on, digressing. So he basically says he was exhausted from the experience. And that tells you something, doesn't it? The egocentricity of it. It's all about him. Oh, I was exhausted from killing all these innocent individuals. Also, he was relatively surprised when they said that he'd killed 9. He said he thought it was less. And he then added to that because it was a higher number than he'd imagined, he felt bad. I mean, I don't really get that mentality. It's like if you've killed 1, you've killed somebody, you've ruined the lives of their families, you've made a choice to extinguish their life that they very much were entitled to. How he thinks that is different from killing more, I don't know. But he's obviously got this boundary of what he expected to achieve, and he's gone over it. He told the police that he brought the gun and ammunition 2 months earlier when he turned 21, and he'd purposely purchased the best, the biggest caliber, in his words. He also openly told the police what his mission had been, that he wanted to go out and he wanted to kill black people. He said that he wanted revenge for all the alleged crimes that he felt black people had committed against white people. And the full aim that he had, his main intention was to start a race war. He told the police, as far as he was concerned, that was his mission in life. He had to do it. And he even added, and he said in his words, black people are killing white people every day on the streets, and they rape 100 white women a day. I mean, it's just Google, innit? You can find anything. You can literally go on Google and say, sightings of flying pigs, and there'll be a website that's like, we've seen 5 flying pigs today, and 1 albino unicorned flying pig. They're very rare. That's the kind of stuff that you get in it on Google. But he's conditioned himself with this propaganda, this idea that he has a right to this justification of his actions. Genuinely believes his actions were justified all the way through. So he told the police that what he did, as far as he was concerned, and this is his words, he said his actions were so minuscule to what they're doing to white people every day, all the time. And just because that doesn't get on the news doesn't mean it's not happening. I think you'll find it probably does, though. I think you'll find the reason it doesn't get on the news that way is because it isn't happening. That's why when it happens, it gets on the news. Tends to be why we have the news. Tends to believe that more than what you get on Google, on sites that are set up for radical right-wing views. And by the way, I also know that the news talks a load of bollocks. We all know how my feelings are regarding that, but we're talking about crime here, not propaganda about other things. But the point is, that shows how he started to buy into this belief system that he knows more than people are being told. He also acknowledges during questioning that the people he killed were completely innocent. But again, what's the psychological justification for why he's gone ahead and done it? He says, well, yeah, these people were innocent. These were completely innocent black individuals just going about their business, welcoming me into a Bible study group. Yeah, I get all that. But black people kill innocent white people every day. That's a very eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth mentality, isn't it? Just to put it out there. When people talk about an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, this is really boring, but I did study RE for my A-level and first year of my degree. As part of my studies, I had a thing about theology, so I do know quite a lot about it. So an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth is a bit of a myth. So say, for example, that somebody came in and killed my husband, that often people believe would mean that I could go and kill the person who killed my husband, right? That's not how it works. I would have to go and kill their husband. That's how an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth works. So you take what has been taken. So he's suggesting because innocent white people have been murdered, therefore innocent black people can be murdered too. He's almost using that ridiculous idea that lies within the Bible. So he tells police he's a white nationalist, and he says white people are superior to blacks. Literally. White people are superior to blacks. Put that in context. Let's just take a minute to explore said given situation of innocent people being murdered, and let's just deconstruct your belief system there, sir. Firstly, you think you're superior to a group of people who didn't know you, who let you go into their church, who welcomed you with open arms, who sat down with you and prayed, who made you feel welcome to a point where you even recognised that they shouldn't really have been the type of victims you went for because they were so nice, who were heroic to the point where they sacrificed their own lives for the lives of the people that they loved. And you think as a white man, you're superior to that? The irony of that is unbelievable, isn't it? When you think about the attributes of what makes a good society, who would you rather have on your side? Because I know, and none of them would be the guy that I'm talking about now, and all of them would have been the individuals in that church. Roof is also really happy to tell officers exactly why he selected Mother Emanuel Church. So this was a historic church. It was really important to the black community, and he knew that black people would be there. They were his main criteria for going ahead and doing the attack there. He also said that there was another consideration that he'd had. He thought about going to a black festival and shooting people there, but he felt that there may be security at that kind of event. So he's even exploited that availability and vulnerability perfectly. So he said instead, he decided to think about, well, how can I get away with it in a situation where I can carry out killings and it's unlikely security is going to stop me? So he starts searching the internet to research black churches in Charleston. Now, before the shooting, he'd even visited the church. He wanted to establish the best time that he could carry out the shootings. He wanted maximum fatalities, his words, not mine. And when he was there, because it was such an embracing community, he actually had a conversation with one of the parishioners there, and they said that Bible study classes were on Wednesday nights. So he scoped out when he was going to do it and picked the perfect opportunity. The extent of his planning was pretty diligent. It really was, because when they explored how he'd got to a point where he'd carried out this crime, they were able to track perfectly what he'd done. So the 16th of April 2015, he purchased the Glock 45 semi-automatic pistol that was used in the attack with the extra magazines. He bought the gun from a store in West Columbia. He used his birthday money. In a birthday card from his father, there'd been an IOU for $400 with a note saying he could finally apply for a permit and purchase a gun. So clearly, the family thought that he was an individual who was suitable to have it. Now, as explained earlier on, he was allowed to purchase that weapon because there were lapses in the FBI background checking process, which is just horrible to realise. During the next 2 months, he purchased more magazines with hollow point bullets and a laser sight, and he did that for a very good reason, because hollow point bullets are particularly lethal. What happens is when they go into the body, they expand on impact, and that creates a larger entry wound. And because they expand, they remain in the body. So they're coated in this soft metal, and that metal peels back and it peels out on impact, and that causes the bullet to mushroom. So that firstly slows down the velocity of the bullet. It means that they remain in the victim's body, but also it means that they are far more likely to incapacitate. So they cause maximum damage. Authorities were also able to find video footage of Roof in his backyard, and during this period of time he'd been filming himself doing target practice, which is all in preparation for the attack. In his car, they find a list of more black churches in Charleston. In fact, the top of that list was Mother Emanuel Church, but clearly, if he hadn't have been caught and maybe had been able to strike again, who knows? He could have visited other churches on that list. And isn't it ironic that it was churches he was looking at attacking? Churches, the last place that anybody should feel unsafe. And they also managed to find a list of other black churches in the South Carolina region, so it could have been any of those places. Telephone records from the house where Roof lived with his parents indicated that he'd also made a call to Mother Emanuel Church on the 23rd of February 2015. His sat-nav, which he'd had on him all the time, and he had on him when he was arrested, it showed he'd driven from home in Columbia to Charleston 6 times during the previous 6 months. So he was scoping this out. He was getting used to that trip. He was getting his confidence up. He was figuring out that fantasy, playing it out in his mind whilst planning. He'd also visited quite a lot of historical sites in the area, but it seems that even though he'd gone to other places, he would always end up in the vicinity of Mother Emanuel Church. Now, authorities were also able to discover photos Roof had taken of himself at the places of historical interest. So he was going around, taking these images, creating, I imagine, a memory box of potential mayhem. Simple as that. When they searched his computer, it turned out Roof had this manifesto, is what you would say. 2,444 word far-right manifesto. There it was on his computer. And it turns out in months leading up to the actual attack, he'd created this website called lastrhodesian.com. And the name of that website was also written at the start and the end of his journal, so it was all connected. The website name, by the way, was named after Rhodesia, which is a former apartheid state in southern Africa. As we all know, apartheid was separating black people from white people, with the white people having a much better time in that situation. But clearly it's all very interlinked. He wants apartheid in the States. So he's actually looking at these countries where the white minorities rule and thinking that that is a benchmark for social change. He genuinely is. And that website that was hosted, he even had it hosted via a foreign server that he paid for because he wanted to mask the fact that he owned it. Now, authorities obviously have got incredible diligence. They've got these incredible experts when it comes down to technology, and they were able to establish it was Roof's, but he'd gone out of his way to try to make it difficult to pinpoint that he was the owner of it. And on that particular website, there were lots of images of him shown posing with guns, with symbols of white supremacy and neo-Nazism. Also contained lots of selfies at various historical sites on an anti-slavery tour. So again, he's going around areas of real historical significance to the black community. He's enjoying it, isn't he? He's going to those places knowing that the vast majority of people who are interested because they can't believe that people were slaves, and he's doing it to psychologically enjoy the momentum and knowledge that he is going to go ahead and do heinous acts on this population. He used to add links on that website as well to white supremacist agendas. Like similar entries were also in his journal. He even set out racial ideologies that were based on white supremacy. Two of his friends, props to them with respect, had been so concerned about Roof 2 weeks before he went ahead and killed people that they'd actually got his gun off him and hidden it. Now, sadly, one of his friends was on probation and he became more and more aware of the fact that he'd taken this gun, and he knew he couldn't be in possession of a weapon, so he ended up giving him it back. And they were really deeply concerned that he was going to go ahead and do something really bad. And they claimed that they thought that the college was Roof's primary target, but because the college that was local to him was a place where they had a lot of security, he decided it was easier to go for the church. So it could have been that he was more of a school shooter in the making and then realigned his plans when he recognised that that would be too challenging. And what was his justification for this mass murder? His justification online and overtly when he was asked about this is one thing. He said, black people are destroying society. He referred to black people as violent and stupid. And there is such an irony there because, let's be honest, who was really violent and stupid? It was Roof, wasn't it? What an ironic statement to make. Think about what he's done, how he's treated these innocent human beings, and how he plays out in his mind that he's superior. There's nothing superior about being a murderer. He even claimed that society just turned a blind eye to black on white crime, which it really doesn't, let's be honest. And he even went on to say that all the guilt that people feel about the past is just exaggerated. Just exaggerated. Slavery and all that. Horrific inequality. People being murdered by police officers, things like that. And I know that happens to white people as well, but the slavery bit really doesn't, yeah? And the truth is that there is a lot of feelings about needing to acknowledge and take responsibility for the past. It's not that it blames people who are white for it now, it's just to acknowledge that in the past, horrible, heinous things were done. And we have to work on equality per se. We all have to think about equality per se. But he didn't see it that way. He felt that it was all exaggerated. And he actually wrote, "We are told to accept what is happening to us because of ancestors' wrongdoing, but it is all based on historical lies, exaggerations, and myths." He reminds me of a Holocaust denier. You get Holocaust deniers, don't you? Where, in spite of the fact that you see Auschwitz and there is lots of evidence of war crimes and whole generations of Jewish individuals were brutally murdered, along with travellers and people with special needs and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, there are some people who are like, it did not happen. Hitler was merely an Austrian painter. Can't do a lot for those people. They exist. We don't know why, but they do. So he even referred to American patriotism as an absolute joke. And when they looked at some of the material that was online, it had him spitting on and burning an American flag. He said that he had nothing to be proud of whilst blacks killed whites. It's crazy talk, isn't it? But he believed this. He stated it could not carry on this way and that he was going to be brave enough to take a stand and to do something about it. To take a stand and do something about it, Ruth? As in murder women and innocent people in a church? How does that solve anything? Superiority, egocentricity, arrogance, heavy slice of narcissism, right? And of course, radicalization online, even if it's self-radicalization online. The reality is he justified everything that he did. And he complained that a lot of people were online talking about this and complaining about the state of affairs that he believed was real for him, but that they did nothing. He said, "I have no choice. I'm not in the position to alone go into the ghetto and fight. I chose Charleston because it is the most historic city in my state and at one time had the highest ratio of blacks to whites in the country. We have no skinheads, no real KKK, no one doing anything but talking on the internet. Well, someone has to have the bravery to take it to the real world. And I guess that has to be me." You're right when you go, there aren't a lot of people operating in the KKK or skinheads stroke how 1980s. That's because most of us are evolved to realise how heinous those kind of communities are and should be stamped out at all costs. In fact, extremism on any level, no matter who believes in it, should be stamped out at all costs because it's dangerous. But you can see there's nothing brave about him. He's a complete coward. He chose a group of defenceless men, women and children, and none of those individuals had a fair chance. None of them were armed. They were in a church. They were unsuspecting, and they were completely powerless. So he's a complete coward. He even claimed that it wasn't too late to take back society, that if people take drastic action, it can be recovered. And he felt that the only way to remedy the situation was to create a race war and that he was going to start it. This little, insignificant, bowl-head, bizarre human felt that he was the individual who had the power to influence a generation in such a reprehensible manner. I mean, how arrogant do you have to be to actually believe that that's possible? You know, all he is, when we look at it truly, psychologically, emotionally, socially, is he's a sick, twisted racist who destroyed the lives of his victims and families for his own warped agenda. He even uploaded this warped material to websites at his father's house just before the killings. And this included a statement that said, "At the time of writing, I'm in a great hurry." So clearly, he knows what he's about to do. He had a lot of time to think about changing his mind. When it gets to court, well, obviously, no one's doubting his guilt. He's admitted it. The sat-nav's found in the car, shows a journey to the murder location. He's on CCTV entering and leaving the church. They trace the purchase of his gun and his ammo. The gun and the ammo that were actually found in the car he was driving matched the bullets at the scene. There are fingerprints on the gun and ammo. They've got eyewitness testimonies from survivors who'd sat through the Bible class with him, so could definitely identify him, and all other evidence online and offline in pictures that post to this white supremacy views. And then last but not least, he he confesses to the police. So when it comes to a bang to rights, you're definitely going down type case, this is perfect. Now, despite the unbelievable weight of evidence against Roof, the defence still try to get a plea deal. So they try to get a plea deal with the state, and they want the death penalty taken off the table. And the prosecution are like, you know what, at the end of the day, that seems like a really rational and fair thing to do. The kid's got a long time to live, so we will definitely not do that. We won't do that. We're not going to do that. We're declining it. He's just murdered 9 innocent individuals. We're not making a plea with him. So the state seeks the death penalty, and the victims' families are more than willing to go through a trial to get justice for their family members. It's a really hard thing to do, but they want that trial. Roof was the first person in US history to face the death penalty, both in federal and state prosecutions. So when the court went to trial at federal court, Roof faced a total of 33 charges related to the killings. That was 9 counts of using a firearm to commit murder and 24 civil rights violations. 18 of the charges carried the federal death penalty. 31st of July 2015, he pleads not guilty to all charges. Now, apparently, Roof wants to plead guilty, but his lawyer won't allow him to because the death penalty is clearly going to be the result of that. So he says he's not allowed to plead guilty. They set a trial date for the 7th of November 2016. It's only a few years ago, this. And the defence and prosecution appoint medical experts, as we know, to assess Roof's mental state. So during this process, Roof learns his defence team plan to assess him for autism spectrum disorder. Oh my God. Not happy about that. Was not happy. Doesn't like somebody else having any control over them. Doesn't like the idea of him being assessed by anybody. Doesn't want anybody to say he is anything other than he is happy to be noted as being. So he threatens to write to the prosecution, who are literally wanting his life. He says he's going to write to them and say he hadn't consented, and that any of the findings would essentially be a lie. And obviously he's recommended not to do that, and he's like, okay, that sounds sensible. I probably shouldn't do that because you are my defence team and you seem to have my best interests at heart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write to the prosecution team saying just that. He writes to the prosecution team saying his defence team were clutching at straws because they knew there was no defence and he couldn't avoid the death penalty. I mean, as the prosecution, you'd be like, seems reasonable. Seems like a reasonable thing. I agree with him. Actually, your client is correct. He's definitely correct. He should definitely get the death penalty and we shouldn't do any assessments. But you can imagine how strange this is. This is a really unusual situation that somebody's actively boycotting and causing problems in their own case. So at this point, a competency hearing's convened, and the defence argue that Roof isn't acting in his own best interest, especially when you consider that the death penalty is going to be the ultimate price he pays. And they also acknowledge that if he was given a diagnosis of autism, it would be a really strong mitigating factor in sentencing. The defence expert diagnosed Roof with autism spectrum disorder, anxiety disorder, and symptoms of psychosis. Now, we all know that being autistic and having anxiety disorder certainly do not mean that you're going to harm anybody at all. It is not in line with actions of people who suffer from that. However, it does complicate things like certain relationships and communication sometimes, and feeling a little bit more isolated, or feeling like you have to mask the way you behave sometimes because you make it easier for other people to deal with you. And it can be really stressful. And anxiety disorder, again, is something that's very difficult for people to deal with because it means that you feel a high level of stress. And of course, psychosis is horrific. I mean, it's a break from reality. You don't know what you're doing. You're suspicious and paranoid, and it can lead to a whole heap of problems. But again, none of that makes you a murderer. My God. There are so many people with autism and anxiety disorder and symptoms of psychosis. Imagine what it would be like if people actually went out and killed people because they felt that way. It just doesn't happen. But nonetheless, they are mitigating factors. They have to be explored. Now later, apparently it's introduced that he also had pretty big delusions. So His forehead was unsightly. It's one of his big issues. That explains his really weird basin bowl haircut. Also, he felt that his body was lopsided because testosterone had pooled onto one side, and therefore it kind of made him tilt. And he also had this convincing belief that his hair was falling out. So he did have some really unusual beliefs about who he was, how he felt, and what was happening in his world. And the defense also said that Roof believed that any death sentence that he was given simply wouldn't be carried out. So they said that the reason that he felt this was because when he was found guilty, he'd be pardoned by white nationalists who were going to take over the United States, and potentially they were going to reward him for the governorship of South Carolina. They would be like, you got guilty, we're going to let you out, and we're going to give you a hero's commendation. Now, I agree, everybody listen to this, I get it. Mentally, that's delusional. I appreciate it. We are dealing with somebody with grandiose, bizarre belief systems and certainly some delusions. And that would fit in with things like psychosis. But it also means that the defense are saying to those individuals who are in charge of figuring out whether he's guilty or not, look, this guy is accepting the death penalty not because he thinks he's going to die, but because he thinks he's going to live. And that's what's motivating him to want the prosecution to just see how he's feeling. So they bring that in. Now, the prosecution clearly are going to go against this, and they say, look, he's competent to stand trial, he's got no evidence of psychosis, and he's got no other mental health issues. And he actually said this, he said, if you go ahead and say that I have these issues, people will think I'm a weirdo, his words. Again, the irony, that he thinks that people would think that mitigating factors would make him strange, as opposed to allow them to understand the psychology of that individual. So he's a very complex character. I think that whatever is noted about his classifications, and the prosecution and the defense are always going to disagree, we see that play out constantly. But I think there was some psychopathy there, wasn't there? You know, he had a need to control. He had to follow his agenda no matter what, even if it cost him his own life. And he would not accept a mental health defense as part of his plan because it made him look, in his belief system, inferior as opposed to superior. And he also takes control of the court and causes ultimate problems there and feels that he has a right to be in charge. These are all things that psychopaths would certainly play out in similar situations. Now, the court decide that they're going to appoint an independent expert. This is Dr. James Ballinger. He's really well renowned actually in psychiatry. He's very, very, very well respected. So they bring in a big baller, so to speak. And he'd actually chaired the Department of Psychiatry and Behaviour Sciences at the Medical University of South Carolina for 17 years. So he is a heavyweight and his words have great meaning. So Dr. Ballinger comes in and he concludes he's competent. His refusal to submit mental health defence was not due, in his opinion, to Roof having a mental illness. And that is taken literally. And he even goes on to say, look, you're not dealing with somebody with mental health issues. You are dealing with somebody who has huge, deep-rooted racial prejudice. And he also brings in the fact that Roof is perfectly able to communicate effectively, and that as long as he has a counsel with him, he is fit for purposes of a trial. Dr. Ballinger also concluded that Roof didn't suffer from a psychotic process, schizophrenic or otherwise, and actually was as opposite to what it's like to be with a person with schizophrenia as you can get. So literally, if there was a schizophrenic in the room, Roof would be the complete opposite, according to this expert. So the court ultimately ruled that Roof is completely competent to stand trial. He fully understood the possible consequences of not submitting the mental health defence. He knew that the death penalty was on the table. And there seems to be a bit of a stalemate at this point because Roof refuses to allow mental health defence to be submitted as mitigating factors in sentencing. His defence team had the authority to decide what evidence submitted in the best interest of their client. So they have no intention of withdrawing his only hope of avoiding a death penalty. At this point, Roof invokes the Sixth Amendment right to represent himself. I know you're all thinking, well, he sounds like a perfectly reasonable person to get up there and represent himself. We would pay to, actually I would have paid to see him represent himself with respect. There's a few I would have paid, and a lot of the cases that I cover and talk about, there's a point, isn't there, in the trial where the person who's defending what happened is like, I can do this better myself. And they can't. They never can. They always do really badly. But he says, I want to do this. And the court rules that he's competent to do that. And they grant that request. So once the proceedings reach the jury stage, Roof requests, when he's just about to have to start going out and questioning people and doing the work, that maybe it was a bit rash. You know what? I've been thinking about this for a while, and I know that I did suggest that I wanted my Sixth Amendment. I do like a lot of the amendment rights in America. I think they're very, very good. But I don't know whether I was a little bit on the rash side now. And I'm thinking you guys who said that you knew better probably do know better. So do you want to come back? Just come back. So he says, I need my counsel to be reappointed, which everyone was waiting for, clearly. Now, during the trial, the prosecution were not struggling. I'm going to be honest. It wasn't one of those, oh, God, this is going to be a struggle. How are we going to make sure that this guy gets spanked to rights? How are we going to get him put in a situation where he goes guilty? Oh, it's circumstantial. You know, it is not. You know, it is so robust and strong. They have so many witnesses proving Roof's guilt beyond a shadow of a doubt. So it included 2 surviving eyewitnesses. That's Felicia Sanders, whose son Tijuana had been killed. Just awful. Polly Shepherd, she was also there. She'd been a really close friend of Reverend Thompson, who died. Now, Ruth's mother did attend court, and I'm going to tell you, she looked terrible. No disrespect to her whatsoever. Remember, this is never a blame situation of the family. At the end of the day, it's horrific that they had to go through this, because they would not ever have imagined that this boy was capable of growing into a man who could do such treacherous acts. She's skin and bone, looks really unwell, because clearly she knows that she's given birth to this child, loved this child, brought this child up. And like it or otherwise, there is a weight of guilt that parents feel even when it's not due. They still feel it. And she would be conflicted. This is the child that she loves, who's acted in reprehensible ways. How do you manage that? I don't know how I'd manage that. I know that I can hardly imagine that anything my children could do could ever separate me from them, even if it was horrific. Even if the courts decided that they needed to be locked away, would I choose not to be with them? To know that you would have to manage those feelings is something that I think very few of us ever will have to even imagine getting close to, let alone enduring. Now, when Felicia gave evidence, his mother even had some kind of fit. So she was psychologically dealing with a war going on in his brain. It's as simple as that. She was trembling. She shook until her knees buckled. This is what witnesses said. And she slid slowly onto the bench. Her mouth was open. She was barely moving. And all she was saying over and over again was, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. When she fainted, which she did, her son didn't even look at her. Didn't even take a look. Just let her be in all that pain, dissolving on the courtroom floor, apologising for his actions, and he doesn't even acknowledge her. I imagine that he'd feel angry. He doesn't want anybody apologising for his actions, does he? Ruth's father didn't even come to the trial, so I imagine he felt a great deal of shame and humiliation, and he didn't want to be supportive in any way, shape or form. Now, ultimately, the defence couldn't bring any witnesses because there was none on his side, and Ruth didn't testify, so it was not very easy for the defence per se. On the 15th of December 2016, it took about 2 hours. The jury come back and they find Ruth guilty on all counts, which is something that I think was an open and shut case. But nonetheless, 2 hours is a short amount of time. And the fact that they come back so quickly demonstrates that they knew from the get-go that this was going to be a case where he was found guilty. And I do think 2 hours is probably a bit longer. I think they were like, we should just go and have some food. We all know what it's going to be. There is a great offer just across the road at that particular restaurant. I don't know whether you can do that. You probably have to have sandwiches in a room, don't you? For fear that somebody will kind of get you on side and make you do something you don't want to do. Now, part of the court procedure, as we know, is victim impact testimonies, which is where the victims get to say, look, this is what you've done to my life. And do you know what he did? During these emotional moments where the victims are trying to express to the perpetrator how their actions have changed their lives, he just complained. He was angry about the length and amount of testimony that victims' families offered. Essentially, he wanted them to keep their stories about their dead relatives and friends quick. And he was completely unemotional throughout, didn't even look up, and he was pretty much silent, full stop. When it comes to the sentencing stage, Roof again chooses to think, now I'm going to represent myself. So the prosecution outlined the aggravating factors of the case. They say there's substantial premeditation and planning. He killed multiple people in a single episode and killed 3 parishioners who were especially vulnerable due to their age. And the aim of him doing this was to incite violence, in his words, a race war. So he also murdered on the basis of race, he showed no remorse, and he targeted worshippers in a church to magnify the impact of the killings. In prison, he'd also continued writing in his journal, stating that his actions were worth it. He'd done what he thought he would to make the biggest wave. So they had all of this. In fact, he wrote, "Now the fate of our race sits in the hands of our brothers, who continue to live freely." The main mitigating factors, after looking at the aggravating factors, were he didn't have a significant criminal record and he did confess to the police, so he didn't try to obstruct the reality of their investigation. But ultimately, the jury found in favour of the death penalty for every single count of murder. And he was sentenced to death on the 11th of January 2017. On the 10th of April 2017, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole on all other counts. He has never, ever shown any remorse. He's never asked for forgiveness. He told the court, "I felt like I had to do it, and I still feel I had to do it." What we've just covered there in that case is a mass murder. Now, let's just take a moment before I finish to look at mass murder. So, first of all, most perpetrators are young males. They act alone after carefully planning the event. They often have a paranoid worldview. They have chronic feelings of social persecution, so these very unrealistic and not appropriate and accurate feelings of social persecution. And it seems that these lead to very violent fantasies of violent revenge on a scale that will make them have attention on their actions. They also typically expect to die during the killings, and they often take a lot of inspiration from other mass murderers. We see that with school shooters. A lot of them have spent time looking at other school shooting events, and they kind of draw inspiration from it. And also, surprisingly, a lot of you will find that most mass murderers aren't mentally ill. In fact, when they look at it, statistically, only 1 in 5 mass murders will ever show evidence of psychosis. Now, Roof was quite unusual because, firstly, he was radicalised, and radicalisation usually occurs when you have interaction with others who might have similar extreme views. Roof was self-radicalised. So he was an individual who wasn't lured in by a group of strangers trying to get him to do things that are reprehensible. He was the one actively seeking it. And he had this confirmation bias where he would just look for things that made sense to him based on his belief systems, and whatever they were that validated them, he took them on board. So he did the work himself. Yeah, he did communicate with other white supremacists, but he never mixed with them. So it was more about forums for him. Also, it's really important noting, when his mother was in court collapsing, that's because she was not a racist. He was not brought up in a racist household. In fact, his own father would say to reporters, "I have no idea what happened. I just know that the boy was not raised in that way." Now, the investigation also revealed that Roof was a reader and commentator on the Daily Stormer, that's a white nationalist news website. And its editor, Andrew Anglin, actually endorsed many of Roof's views. But even he stated that whilst he would sympathise with a white man shooting criminals, shooting innocents, including elderly women, was an insane act. Predictably, Roof's cowardly shooting of defenceless people has inspired other white supremacists. In fact, bizarrely, there's a neo-Nazi group established called the Bowl Patrol after Roof's ridiculous haircut. I know. You thought skinheads might look a little bit on the strange side, but imagine a group of the Bowl Patrol wandering the streets. But like I said, to him, that would be something powerfully moving. The fact that there are these individuals who are actually trying to mimic him. I mean, to me, if somebody's walking around in a group with the Bowl Patrol, then somebody needs to take those kids in, or those men in, and get them in therapy. Because when you are around people who have hate within them, and then you give a permission base for that hate, and then you surround yourself with others who reflect that belief system, you amplify it massively. We have to do better in society when we see these things playing out. There have been 78 public mass shootings in the US since 1983. 78. It's resulted in 547 deaths and 1,023 casualties. Survivors and families of Roof's victims actually were able to successfully sue federal government for $88 million over lapses in the FBI background checks where Roof purchased the gun. So the fact that he got to do that, at least they have been culpable for making sure that the families are offered some kind of recourse, although it never means anything money when it comes down to the fact that they've lost a family member. Nothing can bring them back. Roof is currently on death row. He did appeal the sentence in 2020, but in 2021, the appeal court upheld the death sentence and stated, no cold record or careful parsing of statutes and precedents can capture the full horror of what Roof did. His crimes qualify him for the harshest penalty that a just society can impose. Powerful words, and words that clearly demonstrate that no amount of appeals will probably mean that this man ever gets to live out the years that he has left. Chances are he will be put to death. It's a horrible case, isn't it, to cover? And it's a difficult one for me as well. I'm a white woman, so I can't pretend for 1 minute to understand what it's like to have people who racially hate me just because I don't have the same skin colour of them, or judge me in ways that are reprehensible and that I'm completely innocent of just because they've decided to go online and Google a group of people who have these crazy ideas. I hope I've done it justice. I hope that I've done the victims justice, because what happened to them was just harrowing. The fact that they were just at church being good humans. I think about that young man risking his own life and giving his own life for the family that he loved, you know, in that place. And I hope that when they arrived at the pearly gates or wherever it is that we turn up, that they were given the warmest welcome, because they were heroes, all of them. Thank you for joining me. If you found this interesting, please do subscribe. Go on, get it on. Give me a little bit of a, yeah, go on, do it. There'll be a button there now. Pete might put one there. A little button there. Like that. Do it now. Subliminal processing. Do it now. No, but give me a comment, give me a like, get involved in the live chat when I do my premieres. They're lovely and everyone's wonderful. Again, thank you so much for supporting me on Patreon. Also, thanks for supporting me here. You are bloody amazing. I adore the lot of you. And I'm loving, for those who come in the UK to my shows, meeting you. The hugs that I'm getting are just second to none. God, I've missed hugs. Screw you, government. I'm getting my hugs back. And there's nothing you can do. See you next time on True Crime with me, Emma Kenny. And remember, consistency, crime lives on this channel. See you then.